I think tell the listeners also that Bob's mum is not the same as my mum.
What does that mean?
What way?
Not the same genetic mother.
Mm.
Oh, right. Yes, well, I'm sure that
I'll think about that one.
Hopefully not too long, Mum. There might be something you haven't told me. Anyway, we've got public meeting on coming up, if I can find the notice for it. This is just a first up announcement. This is the Southern Peninsula Tree Preservation Society public meeting tomorrow night, the 26th, at the Rye Citizens Hall at 8 p.m. Very easy to find if you're in Rye, and a unique opportunity to hear the head director of National Parks, Don Saunders, speak, particularly in regard to Greens Bush, but more importantly in regard to the entire peninsula problems in conservation and the future of national parks on the peninsula. So an absolute must. That's at 8 p.m. and it's brought to you by the Peninsula Tree Preservation Society, and this president of which is John McCready. So if you want to get along to that meeting, get along to that meeting. It'll be well worthwhile, a good opportunity, and if you've been following Greens Bush and you need an update, get to it. And from phone calls this morning, there's a bit of controversial literature floating around, and so it'll be interesting to see what happens at that meeting. I think by the sound of it, it's pretty radical. So that's interesting. Roger, we've got today coming up an interview with Ian Rowley. He is one of the most respected birdos, I suppose, in the history of Australian natural history. A brilliant character. He's got a lot of books and a lot of research to his credit, and a person who's never been afraid to tackle controversial research. In fact, it was Ian Rowley's work that separated out all the corvids, which are commonly known as crows and ravens. And before his work in the late 60s, there were only thought to be one species, and after his work he's found 5 distinct species of crows and ravens, and he'll explain the 3 that live in Victoria: the forest raven, little raven, the Australian raven, and their effect on agriculture. And for our country listeners from 3CCC, some very interesting notes on the effect of galahs on wheat farming. Really, he's doing some research right now in Western Australia on it, and I think you'll find it very interesting listening indeed. This evening's show, we've got an interview that we did last week with Barry Cohen. I'll give you an update on the federal situation, and we've got a lot more stuff federally tonight, Roger.
Yes. Well, also tonight we'll be talking about the handover of federal land to the state, well, the sale actually, of the Williamstown Rifle Range, which has turned into quite an interesting little development topic. The developers are complaining because they reckon the state government's put on too many controls for the mangroves on the foreshore, and they don't think they can make money out of that. But we'll talk a bit more about that tonight.
Yes, and also too, a hot tip from inside the big system, that the federal government is being very stubborn about the sale of Point Nepean, which is the very tip of the peninsula on the eastern side of the bay. Very stubborn about the sale of that area to the states, and so we've heard that they've threatened to subdivide it to get their money that way. Very interesting situation indeed. And lots in the papers recently. Perhaps, Roger, Spanish mackerel.
Yes, well, we started to see in the papers last week a few people getting sick from the Ciguatera poisoning. Now, if you remember us talking a couple of weeks ago, and also previously on the Science Show, they mentioned Ciguatera poisoning as being the specific poisoning of tropical fish. The way it occurs is you get these various algae growing on reefs that have been killed and damaged. They grow on the skeletons of the polyps, and they manage to contaminate the fish meat, which doesn't kill the fish, but when humans eat some of these fish that have been contaminated with the Ciguatera, it can become fairly poisonous, and there's 34 people in New South Wales who've managed to get Ciguatera from Spanish mackerel caught in, I think, off the northern New South Wales coast.
Yes, and a little recap on the history of that was that it was unknown until the beginning of heavy development of port facilities that were associated with and the commencement of nuclear testing in the Pacific. And it appears that large amounts of reef have been unnaturally killed, and that this algae gets into the food chain. The fish don't necessarily eat it. It gets into the food chain from growing on the reefs and poisons fish like mackerel, who tend to be towards the top of the food chain. Exceptionally damaging for the fishing industry, no doubt, and another damn good reason to be very careful when you do any kind of construction in tropical areas, areas of tropical reef, and because if you interfere with it, you could be costing the tourist industry and indeed the community a fortune, if not to say lives. So conservation is just common sense, and if you don't believe it, then sometimes it comes back and gives you a good swift kick, and I think this is a classic case. The article says there are 34 known victims, including the first from a country area of New South Wales. The Health Department's Chief Food Inspector, Mr Des Sibra, said 2 people who ate separately at the same restaurant in Orange have been confirmed as suffering from potentially fatal Ciguatera poisoning. The problem was traced to a Spanish mackerel caught recently off northern New South Wales, and all supplies were withdrawn for sale. Mr Sibra said that there had been more reports after the public announcement about poisoning on Wednesday. Initially, only 8 people were thought to have been involved in what was to be the first outbreak of Ciguatera reported in Sydney for 20 years. We're now getting people who are sick and didn't know they had it, and I wonder how much of that's happened in the past up there. Mum, your recommendation on eating fish?
Well, don't eat mackerel for starters. But then again, you know, you think of all the mackerel that goes into the pets' food too. I know you don't like cats very much, but still, you know, you don't want to make them sick, do you?
No.
Poor things.
No. No, I've felt bilious like that on various occasions. I used to get sick every time I came down to city, you know, country boy, city germs, and that'd do it to you. Horrible feeling.
I think Mum's just come up with a great way of controlling cats. Glint in the eye.
Well, how are we controlled? There was an article, food with the irradiation issue lately has become a bit of a topic, and there was an article in Saturday's paper where they're telling us the ways our different fruit and vegetables are treated. Bananas are gassed and our apples are dipped in wax. Grapes are treated with a growth-promoting hormone, and we eat heavy metal potatoes. Pawpaws, eggplant, mangoes and avocados are immersed in insecticide baths before going to market. Bananas and peaches are coated with fungicide. Producers, backed by a powerful scientific community, now want to irradiate the food we eat. This week, the Federal Minister for Health, last week that is, Dr Blewett, released the results of an inquiry into irradiation and opened a debate on food preservation. Irradiation is said to eliminate the need for chemical additives and fumigants, but it throws up the questions of safety. Meanwhile, consumers live on a diet of insecticides and agricultural chemicals. Most tropical fruits and vegetables sold in Victoria must, by law, be dipped in insecticide to combat Queensland fruit fly. Yes, and bananas, peaches are treated in fungicide to stop rot after harvest. Tomato crops are treated with growth regulator hormone. Broccoli, lettuce and cabbages are sprayed to kill caterpillars and cabbage moths. Stored bananas are gassed with carbon dioxide to suppress ripening, and there's a whole lot more actually.
It's a chemical fruit salad, isn't it?
It is a chemical fruit salad and vegetable mix, and as an additive to that, I guess people who want to avoid these things, of course, have to buy organic fruit and vegetables, and at present there are 10 shops in Melbourne. Apparently you have to pay a little bit more and your food doesn't look so good, but it tastes a hell of a lot better, I can tell you that. There are 10 organic retailers in Melbourne. They can't get enough stock, so I think anyone who wants to go out, do the postmodernist hippie thing out on a bit of land, get your act together and grow some organic fruit and vegetables. It seems to be the go.
Yeah, maybe the first move towards growing organic fruit and veggies. I know some really good friends of mine have tried in the past and had a hell of a battle. Ironically, the battle was with wood ducks. They grew this big crop of peas, and he said, look, I don't want to use organic pesticides, but I'd love to use a shotgun. I said, why? Because he had 300 wood ducks who'd taken up residence in my pea paddock. And anyway, he resisted the temptation. But I think that maybe it was a little bit early, that push, because now the simple labelling of food is being... I think, as we were saying off air before, I think that the Australian Consumers Organisation, though they did say that it was okay, there was nothing poisonous in irradiated food, did stipulate in their recommendations, we think, that they should have been clearly marked. And obviously then the private enterprise thing comes into play that everyone barks about so much these days. And I don't think people will buy it, and I think it'll suffer its own natural death. I think where it gets bad is when, with the stuff that you've just pointed out, Roger, from that article, where people don't know what's on their fruit and vegetables. I think if people had a choice, they'd avoid these things. Mum, you're a consumer of these things and cook them up for families and that. What do you reckon?
I try not to think about it too much, to be truthful. But then again, I'm just wondering how long all this has been going on and how much we are conditioned to it. And then if we turn around and start eating the natural stuff, that might
Make us Well, there's a novel approach.
I'm beginning to wonder.
Well, I work in a nursery and we have to do some pest control at various times, just to make sure that you can't sell sticks with no leaves on them. And we have been looking around for alternatives that aren't as severe as some of the poisons they use. And there are alternatives, I think. Various organic pesticides are certainly nowhere near as dangerous as some of the chemical ones, if you have to use them at all. And there's definitely better alternatives that I think the industry as a whole could move towards to give you consumer a bit more safety.
Also, in the line of research, the pyrethrum-based pesticides come from a natural pesticide that's developed by plants, in this case daisies, to combat insect attack. And there probably is a lot more scope for research, even though they may be more expensive, or the initial research may be, to find out what the natural pesticides in many varieties of plants are towards combating known insects, because these pesticides, these naturally developed things that deter and kill pests, have been developed over 300 million years, and undoubtedly there's a whole world of formula just waiting to be unlocked in plant structure and plant chemistry.
Well, that's right. I think more things like companion planting too on a commercial basis. You could actually have a row of pyrethrum daisies up the middle of your cabbage patch, and they'd help to keep the caterpillars
Well,
off.
that's right, and unfortunately the way it's all been presented with that stuff, that still hasn't leaked into the market gardening community. There still aren't enough of the conventional market gardeners getting into companion planting, and even accepting losses. I remember a conversation with an uncle up at Berrigan, Uncle George, Mum, about up there, and he was quite interested, what would the loss be if he didn't spray, and how acceptable would it be? Well, if the loss was 10 to 15%, that just about covered, we're talking about a sunflower crop at that stage, just about, if it was within that amount, it would just about cover it. But of course, if nobody else is doing it in the district, you risk total loss, and so it requires a bit of action. But perhaps the Department of Agriculture could lead on it instead of defending themselves to the last zilch when it comes to accusations about pesticide contamination. We have another article on Mongolian bushfires. You might have been following that there's been some incredibly severe fires in China over the last, well, now how long has it been running for? 20 days?
16 days.
16
that was
days.
on Saturday, so it's
And
19 now.
I suppose a lot of people didn't realise that all of that was bush, but it certainly was, and or is, and it's being burnt rapidly. That swept through 600,000 hectares, and there's also another fire on the other side from the Soviet border. Big problems fighting it, and they're looking at attempts to trigger rain clouds by seeding, and they seem to have failed. But the firefighters contained the eastern sector of the blaze by clearing fire breaks up to 50 kilometres long. So it's a bushfire
That's
just
huge.
out, of a size and intensity. There's been over 200 people killed so far, so it's a massive fire, and our sympathy definitely goes out to those people in China. It's a pity that there isn't the community reaction towards the Chinese people plight in bushfires that
There was here in 83.
Yeah, well, not so much here, but the reaction overseas towards the plight here, and an appeal for those people, I think, would be very appropriate, because I've been burnt out and I know what it's like, and it'd be shocking for those people up there.
The one in Russia's been burning for a month, they say. So two big fires, and the forest, of course, is not going to be as successful in regenerating as they are here, because they're not as used to it.
An RSPCA news note on what we brought to you about that interview with Don Saunders in regard to the culling of seagulls. Just a very rapid recap. The Federal Department of Transport gave notice to Conservation Forests and Lands if they could ask them could they investigate the possibility of doing something about controlling seagull numbers in the flight path from Melbourne Airport, which happens to be the Springvale tip. Now, some money's been spent on research to tag the birds and find out where they're coming from. And, of course, they're coming from Mud Island in the Bay, which is the largest local seagull rookery. And they were talking about perhaps injecting the eggs. Now, we had Abraham from the Solomons who said eat them as a solution. But as a birdo pointed out to me in the weekend, if you collect the eggs, the trouble is the seagulls just simply lay more. So injecting the eggs was a proposition put up, and the drug is called Can't find it. Drug is called something. Anyway, the drug was meant to be a relatively harmless drug, and the idea was to inject the eggs. It's probably still the best standing idea. And also there's another problem with seagulls on Mud Island, that some of the other birds that are nesting there, like the terns and so on, are being pushed out of the colony by the seagulls. We're creating more and more seagull habitat with more and more tips and more open areas where a generalist bird like that can do well and the specialists are failing. And the pressure's on with the ecology of the bay and so on. So it may indeed be time for control, but I think spiking the eggs at the moment is about the best option I've heard. Of course, the other option would be to do some control work at Springvale Tip itself, but it'd be interesting to see how much the costing, or if indeed anyone's looked at the costing of that.
We might break for a track now. This is I Spit on Your Gravy's got a new album out called Fruit Loop City, which is really loopy. A track off it called Batman vs. Godzilla. And I'm not really sure who won that, whether it was Batman or Godzilla. I Spit on Your Gravy. Well, last night on the TV, we of course saw that wonderful John Sayles film. I actually watched a bit of TV called Alligator. And of course people say it couldn't happen here. And I'm just going to add together some very tenuous links. Actually, the RSPCA is opposing the toxicological project that the government wants to set up at Werribee, because they think that it's not worth the benefit of using all that many animals for the benefit of mankind. They say that there's too much, it's too cruel, and they use too many animals for this toxicological research, and they've joined in a number of other groups in opposing the project. And actually that's how the whole thing in Alligator got going, that there was this a scientist with of course no morals who used to drop the extra dogs into the sewer.
What,
and,
a scientist with no morals?
A scientist with no morals.
Watch it, Roger, we'll be libelled again.
And of course the alligator got onto it and grew to about 30 feet and rampaged through the city. And you could imagine that it could be very serious, because of course we've got the Werribee sewage farm down there, and a toxicological unit, you never know, a few puppy dogs, you could get, what could you get? A huge water rat running amok in Werribee.
Giant water rat.
I shudder to think of. So of course we need to think about these things a little bit more.
Fortunately, Werribee's at the end of the sewage system, Roger. It'd be more disastrous if we let it go at the beginning, because that's how the alligator got to grow, wasn't it?
Yeah, but imagine, well, they've got a big swan problem down there. Just imagine 10,000 huge swans.
Monster. Imagine what they do to your
Blot
washing.
out the sun.
blocking out the afternoon sun.
Not to mention your washing. Okay, now, the National Trust has picked up on what we said before, and there's an article in today's, was it, Roger? Portsea land sale would harm park plans, says Trust. The National Trust yesterday condemned what it says the federal government's insistence on selling beachfront land for subdivision near the historic Portsea Quarantine Complex. This is, of course, in the area that should be turned into the Nepean State Park. The administrator of the Trust, Mr Douglas Hill, said the land, which has been the subject of a bitter wrangle, was essential for the proposed Point Nepean National Park. Mr Hill said that he believed a letter from the Prime Minister, Mr Hawke, to the Premier, Mr Kane, had outlined 3 options for the land, which was owned by the Commonwealth and is next to the Army School of Health. These were to establish and rezone for housing subdivision and establish a market value on 74 subdivisions to sell to the highest bidder. Although the Victorian government wanted the land as part of a national park, it could never afford the $8 million or more it might bring at auction, Mr Hill said. Instead of a valuable addition to a national park, it would end up with 74 luxury houses. This is extremely disappointing given the Prime Minister's stand on other national parks and his repeated promises for protection of 4 places on the national estate. The Portsea Quarantine Station has been on the national estate for years, and the whole of Point Nepean was being considered for registration, Mr Hill said. Although the federal government agreed to transfer most of the Army land to Victoria for National Park, 2 governments had not been able to agree on values or costs. Mr Hill said that 2 Victorian Ministers of Conservation, Forest and Lands, Joan Kerner and Mr Kennan from Environment Planning and the Federal Minister of Local Government, Mr Uran, all opposed any subdivision. Mr Hill said if the draft plan for the park was achieved, it would be unparalleled in Victoria. Well, if the subdivision is achieved, it'll be unparalleled for Victoria. I don't know, I wonder if we could see the state ministers manning the barricades to stop the feds subdividing the land. That'd be a very interesting turn of events. Maybe we should try to get Mr Cohen and find out what's going on from his point of view. I know what he'll say, it's not nominated for the National Heritage, so that's it, boys, that's it. But it'll be interesting to see. The federal government, everyone's getting really interested in selling off land at the moment, so if you're living on a block of land and you're a bit undecided as to whether the government owns it or not, you'll probably soon find out. Everything, including public dunnies, looks at risk, and this is just a classic case in point where someone in there from the economics branch of the federal government has said, geez, what could we get? $8 million if we subdivide that? That'll look good. And away it'll go. So I don't know. Be an interesting blue, that one. We'll keep our eyes on it. And as we say, it's a leak from inside.
Also on the peninsula, after 18 unsuccessful appeals and 5 years of lobbying, residents have won their first victory against the spread of the suburban sealed road. And Blairgowrie residents are rejoicing in their tea-treed lanes today following decision by the Planning Appeals Board to stop Flinders Shire Council from charging more than $5,000 a property to seal, straighten and widen the area's meandering streets. And there are a lot of, there's some very established housing down there on the peninsula. A lot of it's in thick scrub, and people have jealously guarded their privacy and the amount of bush that's around there. And it's a terrific decision. There have also been a couple of other decisions around the place. I remember there was one in McLeod a few weeks ago where residents managed to stop having guttering put along their street, and they want to keep that bush character. And I reckon it's a terrific idea.
Blood oath, and there's one of 20 years ago, Ricketts Point down in Balmoral, and the Sandringham Council, you might remember, Mum, were very keen on turning everything into asphalt and curbing. And Beaumaris residents fought successfully in one small section behind Ricketts Point and stopped it, and that area is delightful. Of course, there's no road speeding problems because it's all potholes, so people go along there very gingerly. So if Harry Hotfoot gets in there and his red-hot EH wants to blast a few crackers down the road and drop a smoky, and he hits a screaming pothole, he'll come to a very abrupt end. So it's a definitely good move. Rough roads are good value. Any comments on that, Mum? Would you rather live with bush?
You mostly then only get the people who live there, don't you, using the cars along those roads, and there's not so much pollution, is there?
No.
You've got people buzzing up and down past your door.
Do you have people dragging up your road in Cheltenham, Mum?
Yes, all the time.
Do you? Get out and throw the garden clippings at them, do you?
Oh, no, I don't say anything.
Just let them go?
Let them go.
Yeah, they might be like your son was when he was young, eh? All right.
Otherwise, they've got to spend heaps and heaps of money putting those dreadful bloody bumps in.
Oh, that's
It'd
right.
be cheaper to leave the potholes.
It would be, yeah. Though those organised bumps around Fitzroy are just
crikey.
beauties, aren't they?
And Brunswick are doing them now.
Yeah, there's some manic in
What
Melbourne.
they do is they've had all these cruddy streets for years and years and years, full of potholes. You do your car on them. I used to do my bike on them. Sort of, you had to tighten up the bolts every 2 weeks, and they're spending thousands and thousands of dollars on this street beautification business, and then they go and put more bloody bumps in there.
Well, the original bump should have stayed. Yes, there's something to be said for letting Melbourne's roads deteriorate and slow down traffic. But anyway, there are a few places where there's potholes, mate. I can tell you, going out to Gippsland every week on roads that people sit on about 80 k's, even though they shouldn't, like the Melbourne Road, and there's one there about 3 foot deep that I think they just leave there out of glee, and some local front-end doer-upperer is making a fortune out of it. It's a corker.
One morning you'll notice it won't be there, and all of a sudden you'll see that a Honda Civic's driven into it or something, and everyone will be driving over the top.
But then if you've got a very good car, you'd just fly over it, wouldn't you?
Oh, I don't think so, Mum. This is a bit big for flight. This is more like land in. Anyway, Dandenong dwellers must restrain their pets. And Roger, you knew a bit about both these stories.
Yeah, well, we had a letter the week before last from Mr. Peter Burton, a member of his family, had a dog shot in Sherbrooke. The park, I think, was it Ferntree Gully National Park? Anyway, one of the parks out in the Dandenongs, it was shot by Conservation, Forest and Lands officers, and I actually made a couple of private inquiries. I found out that it wasn't the first time the dog had been in the park, and usually what happens is if dogs get into these areas, they return them to the owners the first couple of times. After that, and the dog's not restrained by the owners, it's shot. Now, the big pity about this is that it's not really the dog's fault. I think if people want to own animals, they should take the responsibility for them, and that's taking responsibility for all their actions. And you just cannot have dogs and cats running wild in these areas. The most obvious effect of it, of course, is lyrebirds. The number of lyrebirds in Sherbrooke have halved in recent years. And, of course, there's a lot of other different things.
Marsupial
birds,
mice.
cats.
Marsupial mice are just prime targets for cats, and they're a beautiful animal that not many people know. Pygmy possums, bats. Cats are horrific destroyers of bats. Bats eat a third of their body weight in insects an hour, according to Rodney's book, Australian Mammals. So I once did a calculation that 10,000 bats, which is a whole big hollow tree full, would consume half a tonne of insects a night. Now that's mozzies and things like that bite you. It's a very important animal and very neglected animal, found right through Melbourne. In fact, we should try to track down Harry Parnaby one day, Roger, and get him to talk about bats, because there's quite a few species. They're right in the middle of Flinders Street, they're right around Triple R, they're everywhere. They live right through Melbourne.
Don't notice them in the city, because you can usually hear them in the country.
Oh,
You
you
hear
can
those
hear
little, but don't often hear them in the city.
Oh yeah, I've heard them right in the middle of the city down in Flinders Street. We've had them around in Sandy Mum. We had them down there. Used to hear bats and occasionally get them in the house. And cats do big damage. Look, if you've got an animal, if you've got a pet, be responsible for it. There's a classic story from Neil Douglas when he was up at Kangaroo Ground when they trapped a dog, and the owner was ferocious, and he'd been around and he'd thumped a few people and was really going off his planet, and he ran into Neil, and Neil confronted him on the veranda, and before the bloke even could open his mouth, Neil said, "Where should your dog be?" And that really is the point. Where should your animal be? If you've got a pet, dog or a cat, control it. It stays on your property and your property alone. That's where it should stay. Dogs particularly are bad. And as any country listeners would tell anyone, the mortality of sheep from pet dogs running around is just phenomenal. People often refuse to believe that their pets kill anything. Believe me, they do indeed. And every case where people have said their cat hasn't done any harm, they've been proved wrong. And in this particular case, if your dog's in a national park, if I had a dog, which I don't, but if I had a dog or a friend's dog, even one that I really like, and it got shot in a park, you can't do nothing about it. It shouldn't have been there. And the fault is mine or my friends for letting it go there clearly. And so there should be really no debate about that. It's one thing to save a dog or a cat, but they in the bush are unpaid assassins of our native animals.
At any rate, that was two good letters that the Age printed, and both covered the subject pretty well. And we've had a few odd photos of animals getting into various places in the city, and one inner-city rescue last week. There was a possum that they got on a tree outside the State Bank building at the corner of Elizabeth and Burke Streets, and the RSPCA sent along Mr. Nigel Williamson to get the old possum down, and they've got a photo of it there with a few curious shoppers having a look at a possum. You had a look at a possum that had dropped in for a few at the Albion.
Yeah, that's right. I came staggering out of the Albion a few months ago, and he's a female ringtail sitting on a no parking sign out in the middle of the road. Excuse me, dying, in the middle of the road, and she didn't seem the slightest bit distressed, and what I figured was that she'd found a place to nest up in appeared the slightest bit stressed, and she just quietly sort of scampered across the road in between the traffic with good sense and judgment. Don't see many ringies killed on the road in Melbourne, which is amazing. They seem to train up to the traffic pretty quick.
Yeah, they seem pretty dog-wise and pretty traffic-wise too.
And she bowled it away and headed over the fence. Obviously, probably no other ringtails in the district. She's got the choice of all the trendy shoots in Carlton, so that was good. And perhaps one last one before we woof off into music-type noises. Polar bears killed a boy. Killed and partially ate an 11-year-old boy, just had a bit of drama, who went for a swim in the polar bear pit at Brooklyn Zoo. They shot the polar bear, or both of them, but the police needed 20 blasts from 4 shotguns and 6 rounds from a .38 caliber pistol to kill the animals. Go hunting with a polar bear with a shotgun, they need their bloody heads read.
Well, the kid got in there. The kid's obviously dead. They have to shoot 2 bears to get the kid's remains out. It's bloody silly. I mean, even Eskimo hunters have got a very, very, very good respect for polar bears. I think anyone who's silly enough to get in with them, the kid was obviously gone. So why do they need to kill him?
I suppose the same police are mounting all the intersections to shoot trucks that hit people and cars and things like that. It's just absolute
I suppose they might be
stupidity.
scared that the polar bears get a taste for human meat and run amok or something like that.
But they're in a bloody cage. They'll run a nothing. Get a taste for human meat. God, you know, they're...
That's the old excuse.
Isn't it? Yeah. All right. Okay.
G'day, this is Dave Mason from The Reels, and you're listening to 3RRR.
Yes, and 3RRR is a community radio station, and if you've been a long time listening to the Eclectic Parrot, or even if you've just tuned in, remind you that the whole station keeps going principally by your subscription, and your subscription for... And Mum's a subscriber, aren't you, Mum?
Yep.
Mum's a subscriber to RRR. Your subscription gives us the facilities, the tapes and the bits and pieces, and keeps secretaries and office staff employed and keeps this whole show on the road. And so we're just going to be a little bit more conscious, I suppose, in the next few weeks of getting you to subscribe. Now, if you want to subscribe, Angus is out there on the phone now, and you can give us a call on 419-2066 and he'll grab your call straight away. And if you subscribe to RRR, you get an impressive list of discounts on things. You get cheap entry into gigs, and you'll often hear gigs announced on air that that you can get a subscriber's discount to. You cover your $30 in a year, and you help the station keep going. It's really worthwhile. So subscribe, you buggers. Get your fingers out and dial that phone dial and get fired up, because it is really worthwhile. And Angus will take your name and address and get your dollar in and subscribe, because we've all got to subscribe. We've got to keep the bloody place going. It's not commercial radio. If you don't want ads, then subscribe. That's basically the drift of it. Okay.
Ravens.
Ravens.
Which you've been doing we've been doing all morning.
Yeah, you've had 50-50 this morning, Roger. You couldn't catch me with that pun, but you could on most other weeks. But ravens are often known as crows, those blackbirds you see going around. they're interesting, and so are galahs, and they've often copped a lot of flack from farmers. So I did an interview with Ian Rowley, who has done a lot of work on ravens a long time ago and on galahs quite recently. Talking to Ian Rowley, this is for Eclectic Parrot, tape for Gippsland Show 3MFM, ident starting after 10, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, Apology
8,
for that
9,
little
10.
abbreviation. This is how it goes on behind the scenes.
Yes, Bob queued that up.
In WA, what's your current position you hold?
Well, I'm a research officer with the Division of Wildlife and Rangelands Research, CSIRO.
Right, and you did some work some years ago on ravens and crows. And firstly, what's the difference between a raven and a crow, and what would we see in Victoria? Would they be ravens or would they be crows?
Well, I gather this program's going to Gippsland, and in that case, they may have a bit of a problem down there identifying them. Basically, there are 5 different corvids, as professional ornithologists group these birds as. 3 of them are ravens in common language, and 2 of them are crows. To the best of my knowledge, there wouldn't be any crows down in Gippsland at all. Most of the resident large black birds would be Australian ravens.
Right. The Australian raven and the little raven, the forest raven, are the 3 common names for the birds that live in South Gippsland.
Right.
What are the basic differences in their own habits, in their ecology? They have quite a different ecology, each of them?
Yes. The little raven, Mallory, to begin with, probably, I'm not quite sure. It's 20 years since I lived near Victoria. I'm not quite sure how often they get down as far as Gippsland. They're mainly birds of the inland riverine plain. They do come down into Melbourne now.
Yeah, they do get into South Gippsland.
Right. They tend to be much more mobile than the large Australian raven. Even when they're breeding, I mean, they breed quite a lot of them together, and this maybe within 10, 20 yards. And then when they finish breeding, they desert that area altogether and go off to, or perhaps glean a stubble or feed on the phasmids up in the mountain forests.
They're the stick insects.
Yep. Whereas the large raven, every farmer's probably got 1 or 2 pairs living on his property. They would have, in old language, about 270 acres of territory. I metricated that's about 110 hectares by my arithmetic. And those 2 birds would then live out their days in that area until the farmer got too fed up with them and shot them all. And then they'd be replaced.
What's this forest raven, that last?
The forest raven was a bit of a surprise. When we started doing this work back in the 1960s, there were only supposed to be 3 crows, corvids in Australia. First of all, we found the little raven, which wasn't known about previously. And then we found this Tasmanian or forest raven, which is an extremely deep voice, and well, from its name, you can gather it does like thick forest. It is the raven in Tasmania. It's on Wilson's Promontory, and I'm not sure how far it extends into South Gippsland.
Mm-hmm.
It's also down on the Otways. And then, even more surprising, we found a little population of them up on the New England tablelands near Armidale.
In New South Wales?
Yep. So it really became a very confused picture. And they really are very difficult to tell apart. difference between the big raven and the little raven is partly in their call. I'm not going to make a fool of myself trying to imitate them over the radio.
Right.
But they do have very different calls. The raven ending up with a long gargle at the end, which most farmers would be familiar with. But if you have a dead one in the hand, the raven has an area of bare skin underneath the lower mandible, which, when it's feeding young, this sort of bags up like a pouch and it carries food for its young in there. The little raven doesn't have this extensive bare area, and what we call the throat hackles, the long feathers underneath the chin, in the Australian raven are very much longer, almost half as long again as they are in the little raven.
Right, and the forest raven, the ones I've seen, it's the thing that struck me was a real bluey sheen. If you get them in the right light, they look black to the point of almost being blue. Is that one of the ways of telling them?
Oh, it's an awfully difficult one, Bob. It so much depends on light and on the condition of the birds. Young birds tend not to have that blue sheen, but breeding birds, sort of just at the start of the breeding season, they all have this lovely blue sheen. They look magnificent.
Right, and the forest raven, what about the habits of the forest raven? Most people be familiar with the other two, but what about the forest ravens? Do they take up pairs like Australian ravens for life? Or?
As far as we know, they behave almost identical in their social behaviour with the Australian raven. We didn't have the time or the resources to do a detailed study of them. So all our information is that they live in pairs which remain mated for life.
Right. Now, with ravens and farmers, it's a long-held belief that ravens take the eyes out of lambs and are principally responsible for a lot of lamb deaths. You did some research in this regard around Canberra. What was the finding of that research?
Well, by and large, I guess basically the findings of the research were that the raven is not as black as he's painted. That's a little bit of artistic license. Most farmers won't believe that the lamb from which they disturbed a raven wasn't actually killed by that raven. But ravens really are scavengers, not primary predators. They don't usually kill their own tucker. They find it much easier to find a bit of carrion and eat that. What really seems to attract them to lambing flocks is afterbirth, when the ewes have been lambing. This seems to have an incredible fascination for both foxes, sheepdogs, and ravens, and even small dogs too. It's probably something to do with the smell of it. And this really is what the ravens are primarily after. Next to that, and this may put some of your listeners off a little, the early feces from lambs is particularly nutritious. Many of your farmers will be dairy farmers, and they'll know all about colostrum. Well, the early feces from lambs are the end product of the lambs ingesting that colostrum, and it's very rich in protein. And the ravens think it's delicious. So that's two main sources that are drawing the ravens into a lambing flock before we get round to the actual live lamb. Then we found that an enormous number of the lambs that we recovered and post-mortemed were lambs that weren't going to make it anyway. And this really is the important live and healthy lambs that would have reached market otherwise. But the vast majority of them are lambs that are starving because they've been mismothered for one reason or another, or lambs that have come through a very difficult birth process and are completely exhausted by the time they hit the ground, and the mother probably exhausted too, she walks off and leaves them. And by quite a simple post-mortem technique, you could, and any farmer can do this, so I'd probably get into trouble with the veterinary profession for suggesting that they do. You can open up a dead lamb and try and see whether first of all, whether there's any milk in the stomach, and whether that milk is being absorbed by the lamb. And the vast majority of the lambs that we post-mortem were lambs that were starving, and either starved to death or were that close to death that the raven really didn't make any difference.
Right, so what percentage of the lamb mortality in the area you studied could you attribute to ravens?
Well, it varies enormously from property to property. Here again, if everyone in the district lambed at the same time, then the ravens and predators in general would be spread out all over all the farms and nobody would complain very much probably. But when you get somebody trying to be a bit smart and lamb before everybody else or do something a bit different, then he very often cops a lot, and he can end up with a predation problem. But that is the exception. Our sort of total figures were at a maximum of about 6% of lambs born could be attributed to some form of predation.
Of which ravens were just part?
Well, it's not just ravens. That includes eagles and foxes and in some places pigs.
Right. Well, that's very interesting, and I'm sure that that'll help dispel some of what's almost become mythology about what people down in Gippsland and through a lot of Victoria just simply call crows without thinking. Currently, on something that you don't have to stretch your mind back for 20 years, you're working on projects with galahs and Major Mitchell cockatoos.
You can't get your money's worth out of this interview.
Yep.
Yes, well, that's quite a different story altogether. With the galahs, when I first came over to West Australia, they were regarded as a pest of wheat farms, and this was back in the days when wheat was laboriously rammed into Hessian bags and then left in the paddock overnight, waiting for the horse and cart to come and pick them up in the morning. Well, when that arrived the next morning, the galahs had got there first, and they'd undone all the stitching on the bags, and the wheat was back in the paddock. This didn't make the farmers laugh very much.
No. All the galahs after they got shot, I'd imagine.
Well, they used to poison them and all sorts of things, but about the same time as I came over here, the techniques all sort of changed, and now wheat goes straight into bulk bins on trucks. You never sees the inside of a bag at all. And the main conflict with galahs was feeding from spilt wheat, either spilt as the truck went round a corner too fast or over a bump, or around the silos at the railway station, or from trucks on the railway line. But all these different aspects have been closed up by different regulations, and the wheat handling authorities here became very concerned about weevil damage in the silos. So the silos are completely insect-proof now, and they can be fumigated, and you see the extraordinary sight of a man going around with a dustpan and brush picking up the loose grain on the ground.
Oh.
So they really have a hard time. But at the same time, there's an awful lot of spilt wheat left in paddocks. And once again, the galahs really are not a nuisance. And
They don't take wheat from the stalk.
no, they find it extremely difficult because the stalk is too, it's not strong enough to hold them. It's a bit like the old story of duck on rice paddies up in New South Wales. It's the bad crops that the birds can get into. There's an opening for them, and then they can feed in from the edge. And they act like a lot of timber getters. They have to fell the stalk before they can get at the wheat head.
Right.
And this, by and large, is a pretty slow process. And most of them don't have to bother because the edges of the paddocks are usually cut for hay, certainly in West Australia, so to enable the harvesting machinery to get into the paddock. So that leaves them quite a lot of grain that they can feed on early in the piece.
So is there much change in attitude with the farmers in Western Australia towards galahs, or do you still get people insisting on shooting them?
Well, I hope you're not going to broadcast this in West Australia or I'll run out of town.
Well, I won't.
There is still a fair bit of objection to them on the grounds that they chew the trees around and kill the trees. In point of fact, it is over-clearing of the landscape and an increase of salting which is killing the trees, and the birds tend to get blamed for it. Farmers don't like blaming themselves for the things that go wrong on their farms.
Right. Well, look, thanks a hell of a lot for that, Ian. It's cleared up a lot of myths, and I think, too, it shows approach in research that's over here really refreshing to actually tackle the problems as you see them and to come up with real answers that solve these things rather than being left to mythology and hearsay to solve those rumours. And it's been excellent talking to you.
Right, Evo.
No worries. Ian Rowley, and a really interesting dude, and some interesting information in that. So, for those people who are living on the land who have been shooting crows and galahs, you might realise then that once the research has been applied to it, it turns out that they're not half the problem that you think they are. And another quick point on ravens. Ravens are great killers of blowflies, and blowfly strike is without doubt one of the most costly problems facing the sheep industry. And both Australian ravens and more commonly little ravens are known to catch blowies on the wing, and by cleaning up carcasses of dead animals from whatever source, on roadkills or whatever, they're obviously lessening the chances of blowflies breeding. So there's a lot of positive things going for them, and as you heard the conversation about galahs, that and there's even, as you were saying, Mum, that there are cases with people feeding galahs,
in a certain area of their paddock each day. They don't have any problems.
Yeah, and we hopefully that'll catch on more. And just a quick note, subscribe. Yes, subscribe. If you want to keep the Parrot on the air and RRR on the air and the whole thing going, ring us now, 419-2066. If you haven't subscribed, pull your finger out. Don't just be a casual listener. Support the station. And you get heaps of value for your money. $15 if you're unemployed or a pensioner, $30 if you're employed. And so get on that phone if you're not a subscriber to RRR and subscribe now. And we had a few other little bits and pieces. Roger went up to Wombat State Forest and found a noisy tape machine, but after that he found some fungi. A bit of a warning, Roger.
Yes, well, I did mention the yellow staining mushroom last week, but I'll mention it again because I've found it in 3 different spots in the last week, and also met some people on Friday who'd collected some thinking that they were normal mushrooms. Now, if you're going out mushrooming at this time of the year, you find anything that's got the normal pinky brown colour of mushrooms underneath it. It may have a white top, it may have a brown top, but they're all safe to eat except for one of them, and that's called Agaricus xanthoderma, which means strange skin. And at most of the mushrooms, when you see them coming up at champignon stage, are usually fairly round, but these guys look a little bit more like, you can equate one to being the Allied Forces shaped type helmet, the American shaped helmet when it comes up, and the yellow staining ones look a bit like a German helmet. They've got more straight sides, and so you pick one of those up, just rub your thumb on it. If it turns yellow in about 30 seconds to a minute, it means it's poisonous, and it should also turn yellow when you cut it. So don't eat those guys, but you can eat anything else with pink gills, and usually they have a ring as well.
Yeah,
and,
a little ring around the stem.
Been running around eating a few other things. I had some Lactarius deliciosus yesterday, which is one of the milky mushrooms. It's one of the orange ones with a really orange sap in it, and that was pretty yummy. We went out in the middle of the bush and lit a fire and fried it up with some tomatoes and onions and had it on bread, and very yummy. So there's a few things around, and if I survive after eating all of them, I'll bring you the good news.
Yes, well, the amount of edible Australian tucker is unbelievable, and the roots of bulrushes come up quite nice. The roots of clubrush, Australian rush, are quite nice, and heaps of things. It's just a matter of what you're cultivated to.
Well, the other thing is you have to remember the conservation status of fungi if everyone goes out and picks them. Of course, you will eventually pick them out, so make sure that you do leave the oldest, you do leave a proportion of the crop sitting around the place, because we don't want a lot of our fungi disappearing from the bush as well.
Yep, all. And just a little quick note, just a last one for Notes and News. An aphid that has caused crop losses nearly 80% in South Africa, US wheat areas, is certain to arrive in Australia. And we'll give you a few more notes on the biology of aphids tonight, because aphids are fascinating insects.
Yes, and I believe customs have been alerted if they catch any passport carrying aphids not to let them into the country.
And another thing too, the public meeting at the Rise Senior Citizens Halls at 8 p.m. tomorrow night, with guest speakers Don Saunders, Director of National Parks, and Miss Stephanie Rennick, a really excellent naturalist. Mr Saunders will be discussing the role of Department of Conservation Forests and Lands on the Peninsula, as well as examining some of the problems facing conservation in this area, with particular note on Green's Bush. Mrs Rennick is a noted naturalist and experienced bushwalker who will be presenting a talk and a selection of slides on the local environment. Her slides of wildflowers and bush and animals are absolutely superb. She doesn't use any flashes, so they're all on natural light, and well worth seeing, and it should be an excellent meeting, if not fiery, from some of the literature that we got told about first thing this morning. So well worth going to. If you've had anything to do with Green's Bush or the Peninsula, make sure you pull your finger out and get along to that meeting.
There's a tree planting on Sunday, the 31st, at Herring Island on the Yarra, which is just opposite the horrible Richmond SEC station. But if you roll along to the Wesley College boat sheds, which is on the Parrot side of the Yarra, round about 10 o'clock, 10:30 on Sunday morning, with a shovel, and there'll be trees along for you to plant. You'll be able to cross the river onto the island and have a look around the place. It certainly needs some development. In a few years' time, it could be looking terrific.
Yeah, and it's an excellent island, 7.5 acres in the middle of the Yarra. I stayed on it a few nights, and it's absolutely superb, well worth looking to. We're getting very close to the end of the show. Thanks, Mum, for coming on this morning.
Oh, it's been great.
All right, you've kept us in line, particularly behind the scenes. And I'll give you... We're getting nuts. I'll give you $100. All right then. And so was it just about time to say goodbye, Uncle Roger? Any last minute things you can say in the 30 seconds that have eluded us now?
No, I don't suppose so. It's no good holding up notes against the window because I'm not wearing my glasses.
That's right. Okay, so it's goodbye from me, Bob McDonald.
And goodbye from Roger, and we'll be back.